It's all right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us here in this amazing venue, which invites for intimacy and discussion, and that's the purpose of today. We will discuss the subject dear to all of us. I am Efraim Gomez. I am a Global Policy Director at WWF, a large conservation organization. So I won't give you the spiel about everything that we do, but I invite you also to learn more about us through our webpage and other things. We're here, we're motivated to be here, and very grateful also to WTO for having the opportunity to arrange this meeting and discussion. We're motivated to be here because the ever-increasing importance to turn trade into a force for nature, to stop doing harm to nature, and also do as good as it can for nature. As you are aware, the nature work is not progressing as it should. Degradation and other kinds of phenomena that we see across in the world of biodiversity, nature, and climate is hurting us. And so we need to reverse this trend, obviously. And we're failing miserably. We should recognize that today. At the same time, this is also a moment for leadership, bold leadership, across all sectors, for all stakeholders, including those involved in trade, obviously. And trade, there's no path to success in protecting nature without trade. And so we're very excited and happy to organize this together with Tess. Tess, I think, is a very known entity at the WTO Public Forum. And so it's Caroline Derbeck, yeah, who is the director of TESS. She has over 25 years in service of thought leadership and dialogue on pathways towards a sustainable and equitable global economy, and done that in many different roles and with many initiatives. And we're very excited about our partnership with TESS at WWF. And she'll make a presentation and also speak to a report that is made available today. And I think we will share also the QR code and other things so you can avail yourselves of this report. We're also joined by Daniela Garcia, DPR Ecuador, and career diplomat engaged, coordinates for Ecuador the dialogue on plastic pollution at the WTO. We also recognize hers and Matthew's leadership in that, of course, as WWF heavily engaged in the work against plastics. And also focal point for the Coalition of Trade Ministers on Climate, which was launched here, right, in this very venue. We're also joined by Valerie Picard, who is the head of trade at the International Chamber of Commerce. Based in Paris, she's leads the development of ICC's public policy engagement on issues related to trade, customs, and trade finance. And we're also joined by Matthew Wilson, Ambassador Matthew Wilson, PR of Barbados to the UN, WTO, and other IOs here in Geneva, also chair of the ACP group and co-convener of the WTO dialogue on plastic pollutions, among many other engagements. We have a program for this, the run-of show for today's meeting is that after we've had a presentation from Karen, right, we will then invite for a panel discussion with some opening remarks, as it is, from the panelists, and then we invite for further conversation together with you, discussion, right, around these topics. We will get to that, what the questions are that we're tabling for you to consider in particular. And we should end by on the hour at, I believe, 4:30. 4:30, right, that's it. We have until 4:30. But actually, there's no event after us, so we can just, can continue. Okay, good. Should I, over to you, Karen,
okay.
Please.
So thank you very much, Efraim, for the introduction, and thank you all for being here today. It's great to see so many people interested in this discussion today, and for us it's really been a sort of a privilege and a great collaboration with WWF on this paper and on this event today. One of my founding ideas when we started TESS was that it was time to reinvigorate these discussions around trade and sustainability, And for that, we need to engage some of the key actors who can help us drive forward change. And WWF is one of those key actors on the global stage. So I'm really excited that we have this collaboration underway. So the starting point for this paper was really that, we're in this time of extraordinary uncertainty in international trade. We can all spend a lot of time lamenting the state of the international trading system. But it is a time also when many of us, all of you, are rethinking the trading system and where to from here. So it's also a really opportune moment to be thinking about where we want the trading system to go in terms of sustainability and what kind of trading system we need to deliver on sustainable development. And here in the discussion today, I'll sort of be referring to sustainability in all three of its dimensions, so environmental, social, and economic. So the paper itself that we're launching today really brings together a lot of the work and thinking that many of you in this room have done. So I think part of it is trying to pull together a little bit of a state of play in the hope that that will help foster and spur further discussion. So in a way, the paper, it's a discussion paper. It's kind of a work in progress. The ideas in it can and should evolve going forward through reflection with folks like all of you here today. So it's really to spur dialogue and also, as Efraim said, some bold leadership on these topics as well. So just in terms of the content of the paper, it starts by reviewing some of the shifting landscape in trade, also some of the persistent trends, and also some of the continuities and shifts in narratives around trade as well. And then it explores some potential new narratives and policy agendas. So all of that in just 20 pages. So if those of you who are here looking to hear about your particular issue or policy preference, you're unlikely to hear it because it's such a big picture paper. But hopefully it still provides a useful kind of framing for the topics. So in terms of key takeaways, the first one is kind of obvious, that there's an urgent need to act assertively and equitably on trade cooperation that can support all three dimensions of sustainable development. We know that the trade and sustainability landscape is extremely complex. There's a range of different actors, processes, initiatives, institutions. So that can seem overwhelming, but it also provides lots of opportunities to drive action. There's also a range of strategies that we can deploy. One of the things the paper emphasizes is that the most effective strategy may vary for the particular environmental outcome or sustainability outcome one is pursuing, or the specific sector that one is working in. In order to drive change, we will need to think very hard about not only policy agendas, but our narratives around trade and sustainability as well. This will require a focus on implementability and effectiveness. And I think sustainable economic transformation, we tend to have a perspective, I think, that's often quite short-term and about all of the ambition one wants to deliver, but not necessarily thinking hard enough about how implementable these policies are and whether they'll be effective on the ground. Another takeaway is that inclusive cooperation will be vital. So whatever strategies we come up with around trade will have to be tailored to the varying circumstances and capabilities of countries, coupled with cooperation around investment, finance, technology, and development. The last sort of broad takeaway is this idea that while sustainability demands urgent action, and many of you here have been at the forefront of calling for urgent action, these are also long problems, sustainability problems. And so we need to be thinking about laying the foundation for cooperation that can be sustained politically over time and that we can foster relationships over time. So that's the sort of broad takeaways. In terms of the trends, I won't go through these all in detail, but as you are all aware, we have a changing geography and composition of trade. We have a range of trade tensions, competitiveness issues, changing trade alliances, growing emphasis on national security, de-risking, supply chain diversification among major trading powers. And we tend to emphasize all of this a lot. I think it's also important that we emphasize some of the persistent trends, so that's enduring and vast economic inequalities and trade inequalities. We still have continuing unsustainability of many trade, consumption and production practices. And we also have an expanding range of trade arrangements and sources of trade-related policies within government. So it's not only trade ministries that make them, but a range of different parts of government are involved in policy making that impacts trade. In terms of the narratives at hand, we've seen a shift away from a long-standing narrative focused on open trade, and maximising efficiencies to more multi-purpose approaches at the moment. A lot of our focus on strategic management of trade and so on. One can dispute whether the narrative around open trade was as real as many perceive it to be. Arguably, there's always been a regulatory cooperation aspect to the trading system, but it's sure that right now there's a shift away from that narrative. We also have a questioning of the narrative on the value of multilateralism, or the potential or the prospects for multilateralism. And on the one hand, we have a consolidation of a narrative driven by many of you in this room around the critical importance of sustainability and global governance, but also a real counter-narrative and backlash against that. And I think the other narrative is that a great push, especially from developing countries, of the need to bring an economic and environmental justice dimension to the way in which we think about sustainability at the global level. So in that context, I think it's really important that we bear in mind this context when we think, hopefully, and idealistically about where it is we want the sustainability agenda to go, because this is the reality we're playing within, and I think it's important for organisations like mine as well to think how best does one navigate in that. And so I think, as I alluded to in the beginning, all of these competitiveness and trade tensions obviously present challenges to how one might advance on international cooperation. We know there's a growing complexity. In many ways, that can undermine efforts to advance sustainability. It can make it more costly for businesses. Fragmentation and lack of transparency can undermine collective efforts and so on. And we know that fragmented national efforts won't be enough to deal with the scale of challenges that we have. But the flip side of that complexity is there's also a range of different opportunities out there: bilateral, plurilateral, regional, south-south, through different types of multilateral processes. Sectoral strategies that we can look at to advance sort of certain sustainability goals in particular sectors or solve particular problems. So we need to be open to that. Similarly, the shift towards more strategically managed trade relations can open up some opportunities for progress on things like renewable energy and critical minerals and so on. There are ways in which we could harness some of that discourse to be driving forward some of the environmental agenda. I do think that in terms of implications in the context of the economic inequality we see in the world, I think that it will be vital that when we think about sustainability and trade agendas, we think about how these can drive the economic transformation that many developing countries are looking at, including in terms of generating livelihoods, diversification of their economies and so on. If we don't think about that, there's no way we're going to achieve the sustainability goals that we have in mind. And then also integrating trade and sustainability policy making. So I'll just shift quickly to the elements of a new global trade narrative. So here in the paper, there are so many ways of cutting this, so apologies to those. We could spend all day brainstorming this list, but 5 that I came up with were that we need to, obvious one first, is we need to reframe the objective of trade to be focused on advancing sustainability goals, and that will require inclusive international cooperation for effectiveness. So what this means is shifting away from the idea that we just need trading rules to stay out of the way, but we need them. We need trade rules, trade cooperation, and trade policies to be part of driving the economic transformation we need for sustainability. We need to, I think, introduce an explicit nature positive narrative on trade, bearing in mind that we will have no economic prosperity without a stable climate and without thriving nature. More than half of the world's economy relies on nature, and so we need to have that as central in this discussion. A third element of that is shifting the trade and climate narrative so that it focuses indeed on the urgent importance of decarbonisation, but also on the importance of adaptation, resilience, and responses to losses in countries that are already facing climate impacts. A fourth element of the narrative is to see if we can focus more attention and data on the opportunities for the environment and for people around the world from a shift towards environmentally sustainable trade. We need to be much more focused on a positive narrative and how this can help support thriving economies and prosperity. And then finally, as I mentioned before, this idea of a shift to sustainability in all of its sort of dimensions will require a clear focus on justice and inclusivity dimensions. So in terms of the policy agenda, we could spend pages and pages on this. In the paper I spent, I think, just a page and a half So this is very, big picture sort of stuff. The first is that we will need to reorient trade and investment rules to support sustainability outcomes. And I think at the broadest level, what that means is finding ways that they reward and provide positive incentives for sustainable products, sustainable production and consumption patterns, while also discouraging harmful ones. A second is that we'll need to harness trade cooperation to promote sort of co-development, diffusion and uptake of sustainable products and technologies, and those that are produced sustainably. And here I think what's important is we don't just think about a boutique list of 15 favourite products or climate-friendly products, but we think about shifting all trade to be more sustainable in that regard. I think I've already mentioned around the importance of equity and resilience as part of a core part of the policy agenda. We can think about ways to mainstream sustainability considerations in trade arrangements and negotiations, so impact assessments will have a really critical role to play for there, and also supporting countries, and this is developed and developing countries, to develop trade strategies and policies nationally that reflect sustainability priorities. Without that, we won't get the international cooperation that we need. So just in terms of the processes for advancing sustainability in trade, this is not new, but just to say we have at least, in the paper we talk about 5 different processes that offer opportunities. So there's the multilateral level. We have this sort of spectrum of regional, plurilateral, south-south, bilateral pathways. Importantly, I think, and that's on the trade side, but importantly, we also need to look to some of the international environmental agreements and sustainable development commitments and fora that we have, where there's also been some of the greatest innovation around trade, the use of trade and trade policy levers and cooperation to drive sustainability outcomes, something we often forget, I think, in the trade arena, that we have these MEAs and other instruments that can provide us a vehicle. Critical to all of this will be coherent domestic policy frameworks. And then I think the last part of this is we talk a lot about stakeholder and private sector initiatives around supply chains. And I think something we'll need to look at is how we connect that to some of the intergovernmental cooperation. Not that the intergovernmental cooperation would constrain some of that dynamism, but it may have a role in connecting the dots, coordinating, providing guidance to some of that proliferation of initiatives that's there in the private sector. So then just finally on stakeholder strategies. So here we found, there's sort of 6. The first is the importance of, all of us and beyond working more closely together to build cross-sectoral and cross-regional coalitions of stakeholders, bringing together business, researchers, NGOs and so on around particular environmental outcomes and sectoral strategies, supply chain issues. The second is connecting the dots really between the environment, trade and development communities, which I think is an ongoing work we're all involved in. The third is continuing advocacy, both for action and also for accountability at the national and international level. The fourth is sort of leading by example. So there's a great range of initiatives, public-private initiatives and so on, government initiatives, and we need to celebrate and work out how we can scale up those. We need to expand the number and range of champions for this agenda. And that's at the top levels of government, trade ministers, environment ministers, leaders of key international organizations, whether it's chambers of commerce or it's in the environmental community, development community championing this. And then all of this needs to be underpinned by robust data and impact analysis. So that's a quick snapshot of the paper. I hope that is a useful overview. I guess the main message is just that whilst we can be very pessimistic and depressed at the moment about the opportunities for cooperation on trade, on sustainability and on their nexus, there are really important opportunities. And if we see this both as an urgent challenge and a long-term gain, the importance of continuing that work now is even more important. Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thanks for that overview. And I really must say it really captures well the macro concept that we're managing here, right? So it's really that level of perspective that we want to employ on the trade and environment. But let me say, now we're moving to the panelist part and the discussion, and we have some questions that we would like to frame the discussion with. The first one is essentially about the priorities exactly that we should have, right? What should be the focus of our work in terms of policy areas, objectives and strategies? The second question, so I won't read them out in full, right? Is what action we should take. And the third one is really on exploring opportunities to accelerate the progress. And the fourth one is a lot on cooperation. And it also, the last one also suggests the different timeframes that we might need to manage to drive this agenda, right? The now, the 3-5 years maybe, and maybe even longer term, right? I mean, we just had this big moment with fish on Monday, but it took 20 plus years to get there, right? So, and I think that's particularly important, you know, for us as a global community now, when there's a tendency to legislate on your closest fear or risk that you're facing politically, right? But with that, I'm now going to invite our panelists to speak a bit, and maybe I'll start with you, Daniela. Yeah, is that all right? So to provide your reactions and also your perspectives on priorities and pathways, right? And also some ideas on how governments such as yourself and other stakeholders can help to drive this agenda for us.
Thank you so much, Efraim,
Thanks.
and thank you, Caroline. Great to be here with Valerie and with Ambassador Wilson joining this very important panel. So Ecuador is exceptionally biodiverse. It's one of the 17 mega biodiverse countries. We have the Galapagos Island, the Amazon, but also the Andean forest. So environmental protection is essential for us. Of course, the area of economic diversification together with sustainable production and consumption certainly are things that are our goals and are essential for our public policy. Just wanted to start by saying that I'm always impressed on how Caroline and Tens and of course WWF with the report, it's amazing how you can capture such a complex issue where a diversity of experience is always needed in such a simple and policy solution-oriented way. So thank you for that report. I did take the time to read it through, so I wanted to also comment, give my intervention and the response to your question in the light of the report. So as you asked for priorities, and one section that is very important in the report on opportunities for actions when we talk about policies, the policy agenda and priorities, what are the priorities for member states if we look at the WTO? And I was honored to chair the TBT committee, which is a committee that mainly focuses on standards and regulations. And I just wanted to share some things with you, because when we talk about WTO and when we talk about WTO, what we can do in terms of WTO reform, we need to see also what is working in the WTO. And in terms of transparency, the agreements that we have at the WTO not only are binding, but they are very effective in terms of what transparency has given us. So very much agreeing to what Caroline has mentioned in the report, the WTO to better integrate sustainability, building on initiatives such as the agreement on fisheries subsidies, and enhancing developing countries' participation. I also think it was crucial to show what is working well, as I mentioned. And the TBT committee as a platform where members can discuss the issues about regulations and standards. And just to say that in the early days, in the early days of the WTO, environmental topics were already discussed within that committee, and members recognized the importance of cross-cutting collaboration amongst WTO bodies already. There was a need. We're still to improve that, so there's still an issue to solve, but that was already recognized, and there was a cross-cutting collaboration already, TBT and the CT on eco-labeling. So members already in 1996 were having joint discussions on this issue. And many things have been done, of course. More things need to be done in the future. And we recently have a joint discussion with the CT committee in things, a discussion amongst members in how do we address certain issues related to climate, for example, when we talk about decarbonization. So that. But also, in terms of, just to mention, 8,500 environment related notifications have been received by members in terms of environment protection. And that, just to add that it is an important thing for the member states. So how can we, now responding to another thing that Caroline has mentioned in the report, the importance of data and transparency. So how we can harness that important information when we're talking about policy design. And that's very important, as we do have important information in this institution in terms of what transparency has given us. The other thing that I think it's certainly a priority, and it has been mentioned, aligning investment with sustainable objectives. We were just in a discussion, Ambassador, in terms of a platform for investment for the Latin American and Caribbean region, and certainly environment and digitalization are two areas that are such an importance for our region. But how do we align those imperatives like investment attraction together with sustainability and of course digitalization are two things that are being discussed and where we need of course solutions. Regional bilateral agreements, I would add certainly the Latin American and Caribbean regions, ALADI, the Andean Community, CARICOM. What are we doing in terms of our agendas when we talk about trade and climate? And I would finalize perhaps when we talk about priorities. There are many things that we have been doing in this organization, how we can complement ourselves better. And there is, well, TSSD has been such a good platform and structured dialogue to address climate and trade, but also other issues such as subsidies, but also circular economy and so on. We have the dialogue on plastic pollution addressing how trade can contribute to the fight on plastic pollution, but also the Trade and Climate Coalition, and recently Brazil announced an initiative on trade and climate as well. So we are doing things, how we can communicate ourselves better in order to agree on common objectives, and of course at different layers, how we can contribute, because we're actually tackling the same problem, and hopefully we can agree on the same objectives as we move forward as governments. Just a final thing, when you mentioned stakeholders, the WTO is not known for participating, for working with the stakeholders, but just to say, and we have international organizations participating as observers in our conversations, but just to say these dialogues that have been launched recently do benefit with the knowledge of the stakeholders, and we're very thankful for that. So these are certainly an opportunity to interact, receive ideas, while we stay focused on common objectives that we have identified together. Just to say that, I wanted to give just a positive note in terms of what we do in the organization, in terms of committees work, the importance of transparency, because members, if we see regulations, the standards, conformity assessment procedures, as we, in terms of what the members are doing globally, there is a lot in terms of environmental protection, and certainly that's a legitimate objective according to the agreements in WTO. In terms of what we need to do beyond the work that we do in the WTO, we're simply building an agenda together with the stakeholders through these initiatives, and we really benefit from your work. So thank you, Caroline, again for this report, and thank you, Efraim, for the question. I will stop there, perhaps giving more time to my colleagues.
Thanks, Daniela. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thanks. You really spoke to many of the issues that are, topical, I think, for our work, and also giving them concrete life, with from their various functions within the trade community here. So with that, maybe I'll turn to you, Valerie, to provide some perspectives also on, priorities, actions, and what other advice you can give us.
I love to give advice. Thank you very much, and I want to say first thank you very much to Efraim and the World Wildlife Federation, and to you, Caroline, for inviting us to be here. It's really important, and I also want to say congratulations on this report, which I read very carefully, and I thought it did. I think in the current environment where there's a lot of information, there's a lot of news every day. I think we're all quite overwhelmed. So it's really important to take a step back and to see where are we at today. And, so it's not meant to go into every single detail, but I thought it gave really good overview and sort of food for thought about, okay, let's basically, I understood this as, let's take a beat and think about how we're going to move forward. And I thought it was really useful. And so, so I wanted to make just maybe 3 points. And this doesn't mean that if I'm not addressing certain things, like there's so much to agree with, and I could have picked out of this report. So I just sort of took 3 that I thought maybe would be of interest, and obviously is not going to be very surprising from the private sector perspective. So one, that this issue around stakeholder engagement, which is so important at every, to bring the private sector into the conversations. We know obviously here in this building that we do not have a seat at the table in any official capacity. We are thankful to the testee because they really have embraced a spirit of stakeholder engagement and have been very active in inviting private sector to participate. And we've engaged with our members who are very excited to come. I mean, I really want to, there is this, our members want to come here. They want to share their experience and what they're seeing. So, the closed doors is a frustration. And it's just, we're not going to make any progress if we don't engage in meaningful and have those private sector at the table. We, as ICC, we have observer status at the United Nations. It allows us to participate in a lot of discussions. So not suggesting, with the UNFCCC, so I'm not suggesting all doors are closed, but here at the WTO certainly is. So in the trade space, there's certainly progress to be made. And I will just add from my experience though, and I'm thinking of, there's dialogues here at the global level, but there's also, of course, the in-country dialogues, which are so important, and creating public-private dialogues and multi-stakeholder dialogues. Yes, it sounds good on paper, but it's not always easy. Public sector and private sector are not speaking the same language, and sometimes there's preparation that needs to go into. So one of the questions I have is how can we have more effective public-private dialogues on sustainability would be something to look at. 2, in the current environment, it is, I'm not speaking loud enough. Is that, yeah, I'm so sorry. I just was told the same thing before. I said I was like, it's like a Seinfeld character. I'm the soft talker. So 2, wanted to touch on is around in the current environment, which we know is extraordinarily challenging at the moment on the multilateral front, which I don't, and I will come back to that point, my 3rd point. But I think one of the things is when we put out a paper on some principles on CBAM, how to design an effective CBAM. Lots of good principles in there, but just building on this theme though, one of the things we say is there needs to be effective interagency cooperation domestically. It's really, really important. So at the moment, yes, maybe multilaterally there may be some challenges, but there's no reason we can't make progress domestically. I mean, I'm not suggesting it's easy either, but perhaps there's more control over making that. So we think that's something that's quite key. And I know from the experience on the trade facilitation side, where there are national trade facilitation committees, are there similar mechanisms? There are things that we can do to improve as well, to bring everybody into the room together. And in fact, also on the CBAM, one of the things that we've called for is to bring the UNFCCC and WTO together to address some of these issues, because a proliferation, it's great that there's different FTAs and RTAs and there's different, but right now we have multiple CBAMs being rolled out and the private sector is facing a very fragmented very fragmented landscape with many barriers, and so we need to find a way to make it work. And that brings me to the 3rd point, which is around the multilateralism. And at the moment it is, as Caroline said, we all know it's difficult, but this is a global issue. The solution has to be multilateral, so we need to make progress here. And so, we, and speaking to our members, they want to see progress here at the WTO on environmental goods and services. They want to see on circular economy and all the stuff that's being worked on that is being worked on but want to see more progress on. But the reality is also that we know this, that there are challenges here. And so what we would say is, what we want to see is to fix some of the, I would say, we can't get to the negotiating agenda items until we fix some of the structural systemic issues. So what we're hoping is, and what we're really pushing for is, let's now, with the situation we're in, let's address some of these cross-cutting issues that are going to block progress, like around consensus, perhaps around special and differential treatment, which is very important in the context of course, what we're discussing here today, and plurilaterals, so that we can make progress on this really, really important agenda of sustainability. And it's important not just because it's the right thing to do. I think hopefully everybody in this room agrees that. But it's also a business imperative. We all are very excited about AI, but we all know it needs a lot of water, a lot of power to run those data centers. So we want to see all this. So we absolutely have to make progress. There's no choice. So, and I think just to conclude, just to come back, so I think this is really good to take this time for us to think about where can we be most effective, and how can we move forward all together. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Valerie. Those are good questions for you too, Matthew. Where can we be most effective, and what should we focus on?
Yeah, well, first of all,
Yeah.
great paper. Sorry for coming late. I misplaced my iPad, couldn't find it. I was panicking. But yeah. Listen, I read this paper maybe when the rain was falling outside, so my mood was a little bit down. Because as I was reading it, and it's an excellent paper, and I would expect nothing less from Caroline and her team, I kept thinking about the realities that we're dealing with. And Valerie and Daniela, you guys have hinted at that, but it's bad. It's really bad. When we're being told that we have to eradicate the word climate from UN resolutions and UN documents, it's bad. When we're at the plastics treaty negotiations and you see what some countries are doing, and it's not just the US, let's not kid ourselves. There are a lot of people who are hiding behind the coverage of what the US is doing on climate to be able to roll back a lot of what we thought we had achieved. So it's not just an attack on multilateralism that we're facing. We're having a real attack on this notion of the reality of climate change and on facts and science. So as I was reading this document, I thought, well, how on earth does this help us to be able to address these real issues that are happening? Because we are in an uphill battle. I feel that we almost have to rewire the system again based on facts and science. When I hear news reports like I heard yesterday, like 75% of the heat-related deaths in Europe caused by climate change, I'm thinking, okay, what more do you need than that? When you have a hurricane in the Caribbean and it eviscerates the GDP of a country in 1 hour, these are facts. These aren't conjectures. These aren't things that are being made up. When in my small country, children are having problems learning in schools because it's getting too hot. The machinery is breaking down because it's getting too hot. The yields in the farms are not what they used to be because the soil is completely destroyed. These are facts, So I don't expect a document of 20 pages to deal with something quite existential that we're all trying to grapple with, but I think it really does reinforce certain fundamentals. And I think that that's an important thing that we need to do during this period, is reinforce some of the fundamentals and put nature, as you said, at the center of our trade policy. And it's not as difficult as people think. As Danielle said, this is not an alien concept in the WTO. Look at the Marrakesh Declaration, it's there. The CTE has been existing for 20 plus years. We're doing great work in the Plastics Pollution Dialogue, great work in TESDS, Anna is here. Things are happening. Fine, we're not moving to the level of rulemaking, but I think that what we're doing here is actually affecting the decisions that countries are making at the domestic level as well. We have got to focus on the green transition and technology transfer and the transfer of knowledge. It everyone talks about it, but it's not really happening.
Mm.
Yeah, especially not the small island development states, I have to say. There's still incredible barriers to being able to access the kind of technology that we need to really invest in the circular economy. And I think it was you, Carolyn, who said this. A lot of this really is also at the local level. And I can tell you that in many of our countries, the trade ministries don't talk to the environmental ministries don't talk to the agriculture ministries, and they certainly don't talk to the finance ministries. And we need to be better at orienting things at the local level. And I'm really happy to see what Brazil is doing for COP30. We met with the COP president designate this morning. He has a very clear perspective on breaking down these silos between trade and climate. Of course, this is not a new idea. Carolyn herself piloted this about, 2 years ago with the climate and
Coalition of
I
Trade
should know
Ministers
this.
on
Yeah,
Climate.
yeah. So this is not a new idea, of course, but I think seeing it replicated at the level of the COP presidency, I think it shows that you were on the right track, and we have to see how we can build on what it is that they're doing. And like the relationship between the circular economy and trade, I think is pretty obvious, and I think everybody in this room, we're probably all on the same page. Yeah, I mean, if you look at Africa, for example, 60% of the world's solar energy, in theory, 30% of critical minerals, vast hydro and geothermal resources, and you know how much investment they receive in global clean energy? Somebody tell me a figure. How much?
2%?
Oh God, you read the same article as me almost. 2%. 2%. I mean, come on, that's fairly ridiculous, you know? So we also need to look at this issue through the lens of sustainability, trade, and investment. The investment part is really, really critical. Apparently 600 million Africans still live without electricity, which I find shocking. Constant electricity. And then you'll find similar stories in the Caribbean and the Pacific, and I'm sure parts of Latin America as well. But then you see the movement of solar panels, and you see what China is doing in Africa as well. Now some will say that this is creating another kind of neo-colonial dependence, but frankly, our countries need these solar panels. We're getting them relatively cheaply now because of maybe overproduction, but we're getting them. And if we use it wisely, these solar panels can lower the cost of electricity, put more people onto the grid, and really have a tremendous positive environmental impact and economic impact on what we're trying to do. Apparently China is now installing 100 solar panels per second.
Wow.
You know, so it's pretty crazy. Then on the other hand, we have, let's say, the US, for example. Let me just use them as a US, where apparently this year, clean energy projects worth about 20 billion have been cancelled. About 800 million were cancelled in 2024, so you see the difference. And investment announcements into green tech fell by nearly 20% in 2025 compared to the year before. So that shows you where the largest economy in the world is currently going. So you have some work to do. So listen, I think the paper does a great job of covering a lot of the relevant areas. If I were to suggest that you extend this to 40 pages, there are a few other issues I would want you to look at. I'd want you to take a closer look at financial mechanisms and investment flows. I think that's really critical. Maybe a deeper dive on technological innovation and digital trade. Maybe looking closer at some urban and local level initiatives that could be scalable, including what you said, Valerie, about bringing the private sector and stakeholders on board at the local and regional level. Closer look at consumer behavior and market demand. Of course, private sector and business engagement. And then, of course, monitoring, enforcement, and compliance mechanisms is a really useful methodology to look at as well. So in conclusion, I mean, I really feel, Carolyn, this is an incredibly important addition to the toolbox on trade and sustainability. And I feel that there is potential to reinforce some of these key messages and maybe to dive a bit deeper into a few others. Thanks.
Thanks, Matthew. And with that, it concludes the opening of the panel. And now, a lot of rich comments, I think. You know, Carolyn and I have been writing intensely here from our panelists. I think they all speak to the sort of the essence of the questions that we put also to their audience and the participants in this discussion. But I'd like to invite you as well to ask your questions now. I think we have about 20 minutes for discussion, in which we would really like to have also thoughts and comments and questions from the audience. And while you are doing that, maybe pondering what you would like to address to the panel. Maybe I can invite you a bit, Carolyn, to make some first comments. I think from the panelists.
Sure, thank you. I mean, I really want to hear also from all of you. One of the things I was concerned about in writing the paper is I sort of started off with 3 or 4 pages on sort of the scale of the crisis we have and why this matters also economically. Because I think this is one way we can mobilize some of the stakeholders and also the trade community. So I really take your point about the importance of sort of grounding this in facts and science. And also I think that we need to ground it in facts and science around the economic opportunities that are here as well, because that's part of the way you mobilize people, but also around the risks. I was speaking to someone here who's working in the financial sector in London, and he said the key to all of this is don't forget that insurance companies are still concerned about climate change. And he said, so we have to look for some of those actors. If they will not underwrite certain things because of risk, then that's something that trickles all the way through the system, and that hasn't gone away, irrespective of what might be happening in trade diplomacy and so on. So that made me think about who are our friends in a way in this, and if we think about those facts, we can find that we have friends who care about those facts too, or allies who may care about those facts as well. I really took Daniela's point around communication, because my feeling sitting in multilateral Geneva, like on the one hand, we're all very aware of the constraints, on the system, but I see a set of countries on a daily basis, most countries here still trying every day to find ways to work together, to identify common solutions, to see where the opportunities to collaborate are. And really importantly, I think a lot of that's driven actually by developing countries here. And it's not the narrative that we have out publicly enough. And so I think part of it is communicating about the work that is going on, the efforts the governments are making. But I also think part of the reason it doesn't get traction is there's not enough traction domestically to connect the dots between all of this. So I don't know if that connects some of the pieces that you have all mentioned. And one other thing I also thought here is in the dialogue on plastic pollution, for example, we've seen tremendous energy when governments can focus here around a shared problem. And perhaps in a way that happened with fisheries, it took 25 years, but it was a shared problem. It was quite concrete, and you can mobilize a range of actors around that. So I think we need to look harder at that kind of, what are the problems we're trying to solve, and we can organize people around, while at the same time recognizing there are some systemic things behind that will require more cross-cutting kind of approaches, things like around finance and technology and investment and so on. So we sort of need a blend, if that makes sense.
Do we have any questions or comments from our audience? Well, yes, please. Yeah, sure. There's no mic. There's no mic.
It's just us.
So.
Thanks very much, Carolyn. That was really interesting and really nice to hear all of your reflections. I'm Ellie Belton. I work at E3G. We're a climate think tank, and I lead our work on trade. This is actually a conversation that Carolyn and I started having earlier this week, and I think many of you touched on it. So, given the state of the world at the moment and the fact that everybody is thinking really short term, kind of stuck in crisis response mode, and I think we all agree that so much of this is kind of long-term thinking. How do we move into that long-term thinking mode when everybody is stuck in short-term thinking mode and try and turn some of these ideas into implementation and delivery and reality? Thanks.
question. Is there any other question, or we just move ahead with this one? We have 2 more. That's good. We take 3 at a time. You go first.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if you had thought much about the sort of challenge in terms of narrative shaping that I see, particularly in the United States, but I think in a number of developing countries, that actually associates trade and its connection to the clean energy transition with job loss and offshoring. And I think, you know, there's obviously a lot of demagoguery around that, but it is true that clean energy supply chains are very concentrated right now, and manufacturing and clean energy technologies doesn't necessarily generate the same livelihoods that more previous generation manufacturing did. And how do we push back against that counter-narrative and make the case that aligning trade and climate is actually going to create inclusive prosperity broadly in the world?
Writing down the question. We'll take yours while we're waiting. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I represent, from the Netherlands, I represent farmers. We are also here as World Farmers Organization, and I'm also in Brussels a member of the European Economic Social Committee on the International Trade
Could
for
you
All.
speak up a little bit?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think farmers are your friends as well because of the consequences of climate change. And here, since we are here at the WTO, what you could add perhaps in another page, getting to 41 pages, I think, is the rules for insurance. Because nowadays the international trade rules say 30% is the damage threshold before you can start having your crop insurance. This is actually not working in my country and many other countries. Farmers feel that the damage is too big, the insurance, crop insurance is not attractive. And this is coming back to WTO rules, to international rules. The other thing I would like to say is competition legislation. We are moving quietly forward where horizontal cooperation between companies is allowed when it comes to sustainability initiatives. But this is still very difficult because we all have to accept that if we want to move forward in terms of the environment, biodiversity, clean water, the soil, animal welfare, often there are costs involved. And the question is, who is going to pay for this? Low price is still, you know, challenge is what's leading companies going for the lowest price because you want to attract consumers. How do we get away from this? And the role WTO could play, perhaps. Okay, good questions.
Good.
Can I handle that insurance one? There's something I
Yeah.
really want to say on insurance.
Yeah.
I don't know if many of you know about the Bridgetown Initiative. It was an initiative launched by my Prime Minister, Mia Mottley, Small Island Developing State, International Financial Architecture, Climate Financing, blah, blah, blah. I shouldn't say blah, blah.
It's a good initiative.
So now we're on to Bridgetown Initiative 3.0. And a big part of that is actually on insurance. Because of exactly what you've said and exactly what Caroline has said, that we're actually finding that some insurers are not willing to support rebuilding in the Caribbean because clearly they think, well, next year we're going to have a hurricane and knock it down again, right? So what the Bridgetown Initiative has done with the Insurance Development Forum is that we've partnered to make insurance a key part of the international financial architecture and to position insurance as a central enabler in the global response to climate change. Also tapping into their money. They have a lot of money. So we're trying to bring them on board with this global initiative as an equal partner to tackle these issues. Now, what Ellie and the gentleman here said, I mean, it's very much based on narratives. And sometimes I feel we really don't get the narratives right at all. You know, with all due respect, I am not sure if some of the actors that we're dealing with now are going to be attracted to the terminology, a nature-based approach to, you know, I just don't think so. And I would never forget in a previous job when my boss and I were going to a country that I shall not name, but which had shall we say, a pretty draconian view of women's economic empowerment. And we were going there and we wanted to talk about our She Trades initiative, etc. And she said, well, we're not going to go there and talk about why this is the right thing to do, even though we know is the right thing to do. We're going to go there and we're going to talk to them about the economics of it. It's why it's the smart thing to do. And I feel that we need to, in a way, transform some of our narratives to actually meet some of these people where they are, to help them, to bring them to where we are. Far too often, I think, in the climate change community, we speak from a pedestal and we speak down. And we need to change how we do that, especially now, where some people are having a problem with academics, or with scholars, or with researchers. We need to find a smart way, using economics as a gateway, to talk to some of these people.
Find out what's important to them.
And yeah, Daniel, what's
No,
your
No, just
reflection on
perhaps,
the? We have 3 questions: long-term thinking, we have prosperity, supply chains, insurers.
No, just perhaps on the
competition.
long-term thinking, I mean, it's essential, right? As a developing country, I can say sometimes there are short-term urgent issues that you need to tackle, energy, health, but of course everything goes by like having the right planning. And the dialogue, I think the dialogue is a good example where I think we had 6 coordinators, 5 developing countries, and we sit down to plan the way forward, actually, with objectives to the future. We work towards that, and we have been working in that sense and having different groups, technical modes. I was just thinking that perhaps going to the point of the paper, the importance of champions, there's quite a lot of champions in this trade and environment area within the WTO, and such an important issue. When we talk about trade, we think about trade not being the good guy in terms of environment, but actually I like what you mentioned, Ambassador, when we talk about the economic, the narrative, and actually protecting the environment makes it makes sense economically, also socially, and that's been something that developing countries have been mentioning quite a lot for different areas. But what is missing, and I get the point, while we're trying to communicate what we're doing, we also need to acknowledge what we need to do. That's one of the things is planning, and perhaps coordinating together the champions in the room, having a lot of initiatives, but having a way forward in terms, okay, why are we here? Reminding ourselves, like we are doing for reform, I think, why are we here? Setting a plan forward, taking into consideration the interlinkages as well when we talk about environment, trade, but also taking into consideration the social perspective. We're forgetting health, and that's such an imperative when we talk about circular economy. I mean, health being such an essential issue, we haven't had that conversation still in the WTO. So actually looking long term, sitting down, reflecting, it's a thing that we need to do, perhaps amongst the champions, and taking into consideration the different initiatives. That's something that I like in the TBT, and that's why I bring that perspective. Sometimes we agree by consensus in a committee, and sometimes we think that in the WTO we are not agreeing by consensus anymore. The TBT we do every 3 years, we have a plan, what we're going to do for the next 3 years. And of course, certain things, climate related, digital, I mean, people say like, we're just talking about AI in the WTO. Actually, we were talking like already 2022 in the TBT, but environment is there, we agree things in advance. So taking also the good examples in terms of coordinating from what we do in terms of work in the WTO would be good also for our initiatives, how we get together, how we coordinate together, acknowledging what we are missing, and long-term planning is one thing, certainly. I like the point there is about the narrative, certainly a lot of developing countries taking the lead, also the support of the academia, of course, the stakeholders have been instrumental in the Geneva community. So how we can harness that, including new actors, insurance actors you have mentioned. But I just wanted to say that about long-term planning be such an important issue. Certainly taking the point, a reflection is needed as a policymakers. Political at a political level is another thing, but it's always good to have something ready when politicians when they need something. Usually, the technical community or the policy community needs to have something ready to present as a plan. Just.
Oh, good. The economic case is ours. We just haven't made it well.
Maybe I'll just, because the points are sort of well said, I think also just to remember that investment by its very nature is long term. Like you're not going to build a power plant or renewable plant. It requires long-term thinking. And so again, I think the investment side of this is really important, because what we need to be looking at for countries is what can I do? What do I have control over and I can do? Countries can make their home markets attractive to investment. So what does that mean? That means having legal and regulatory certainty around it, which investment requires. So, and as we all know, that's in the air du temps. But that already is done. I mean, the investment facilitation agreement is here, and I know countries are already starting to move forward with its implementation. Nobody needs to wait. At the end of the day, it's the biggest benefit is to themselves. So I just wanted to. You're right, because we're sort of navigating a very difficult, and as Matthew said, I mean, I think said it better than anyone, but you have to at the same time it's moving forward in some respects. So I think just look for every single place you can move forward.
But this is true in the investment facilitation agreement, as well as for the e-commerce agreement. Are we taking into consideration environment and how we are doing that? That's something that perhaps we need to really incorporate as mainstream in environment. But just taking, sorry to jump in.
Oh no.
Just reminding, because for the e-commerce, we don't see environment in the text. There's no one mention about the environment being a lot of issues when we talk about digital trade, for example,
but
plastic packaging.
But here's a question: does it do we need to have to mention it everywhere for it to help these that's I mean, it's to Matthew's point. I mean, I understand it, but it's a question because will it then because if it's gonna be a byproduct, and I'm not against it at all. I'm just wondering. It's to the point that you made. Putting that sort of and I don't know. I don't have the answer. I'm just wondering if it ends up being a distraction.
Can I just jump in on
Absolutely, Carolyn. Then we have one question. Maybe we can allow. Okay, three more questions after your.
Okay. So I will be quick. Just to say, point really well taken, Matthew, on the difference between discourse that's right and discourse that's smart. And I think part of the challenge for us is to know when we're trying to, because I think it differs depending on whether you're trying to galvanize your allies or potential allies, and whether you're trying to talk to those who are not necessarily your allies. So my feeling is among the broad community of those who might describe ourselves as allies, we've got work to do on collective narrative that works for that long-term game and for that idea of shared prosperity. And we too easily fall into buying into a very short-term focus that ends up being just as nationalistic and not helpful to the interconnectedness of economies and the environment. So I feel like getting that internal narrative kind of right is actually important. And I guess in a way this paper is more addressed to those of us who are trying to build that way forward, but fully take the point that, I mean, there should equally be a whole thing. So how does one do this strategically? And so it's interesting when you mentioned about the nature positive discourse. I mean, I feel this because sometimes I come to the WTO talk about nature and it's like kumbaya, like who cares? Where does it fit in? Maybe you might get people to see fish as part of nature, or maybe they might connect agriculture with nature. But if you talk to some businesses, and this is, go to even like Davos, financial sector people are really concerned about soils, about water, about ecological systems that underpin the sectors in which they're investing, agriculture, fish, tourism, and so on. So it's not that foreign to them, but there are different frames. So in the G20, they talk about sustainable bioeconomy. Maybe that's more an exciting, or bioeconomy, I'd like to make it a sustainable bioeconomy. But, so you have different framing that works. So, but point really well taken. And then I was just going to say, I think one of the core things we need to do when talking, I can't answer your question, Trevor, it's the million-dollar question, but I do think we need to think more about shared prosperity, and it's too easy, even for a lot of us advocating. I mean, I hope I'm not in that category, but there are many advocates nationally, in order to fit in with the national mood, end up reinforcing exactly the wrong narratives around trade and around economic cooperation and environmental cooperation. And that's one of the reasons I think that it's this wider NGO, academic community, and the business sector who can help keep governments, who are necessarily sometimes focused on short-term electoral cycles and political cycles and which constituencies they can't afford to leave. So the narrative has to be owned a bit by others, but by those beyond government. But we also need, like even the WTO system, we have many governments who see themselves as champions of the rules-based multilateral trading system. But we need countries that are equally committed long run to being champions of a system that works for sustainable development sort of outcomes as core to their participation here. And we have some who do that already, but probably that's something I think we need to keep high in mind. But I think part of that is also about being intellectually honest. Like, not all trade benefits all parts of communities. It can decimate certain communities. It can have real costs. Not all trade is good for the environment. There's plenty that's very environmentally damaging and harmful. So we have to, I think, be a bit honest about the discourse in order to bring people on board to where the potential lies. And we say, well, there are opportunities to do better, but we're going to need to do that together. It's going to need to be a bit more around some shared prosperity. But I fear that too many of our politicians throw all of that out of the window for short-term kind of electoral gain, and there's not enough political leadership in that sense of just looking at this as long-run international cooperation remains critically important to tackling.
Yeah, but also the business community, with all due respect, I mean, how many of them have left that banking, what was that thing, that banking association?
The Carney.
Yeah, how many have left that?
Yeah, they're not necessarily reliable.
How many have given up on the green goals, not to
Yeah.
mention the DEI goals?
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how authentic some of that was either, and we need to think about that. Why was that not fully anchored into the business community's consciousness?
Yeah.
And I
Well,
think
this
it-
is why one of
could-
my points on,
sorry.
on policy strategies was around accountability, right? That
Yeah.
that's still a key thing.
And
Sorry,
if
go
I
ahead.
could come back, I think it comes back to, because of course there was a lot of sort of these initiatives in the greenwash. I mean, everyone's very aware of that. Like, that's one of the issues. But again, if you bring it back to, as you were saying, what is important to what speak in their language, to something that really matters to them. And I think then that's where you get that convergence. I'm not going to say that every single, but I do think, and there's, and yeah, I think, and there is enough, there are also momentum in places where there is, I guess, looking for we have a lot of companies who really do want to implement circular economy models because it makes business sense, but they can't because there are too many trade barriers. So they simply, like, if you're a textile company, one of the things is you try to get used textiles across the border. It's for them. It's waste.
But that's
it's,
a health problem.
Yeah,
yes.
but but there's this.
Ecuador will.
Yeah, but there's a real pragmatic issues to some of this that's blocking as well. So, anyway.
I've been a lousy time manager. We're soon moving into 4:30. Can we run over a bit? No. Good.
No, I
No.
actually can't.
You can't, right? No, panelists either. Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm sorry for that, okay? But we'll hang around a bit, so the others, if you want to, you can ask your questions. Some of us may be here. In conclusion, maybe then, where are we? Carolyn, I would say, let me offer some remarks, some thoughts myself. I think in the current state of multilateralism, it's exceedingly difficult to try to codify like a new agenda, right? Like this, or a new agenda, or make it really bold, or I think all of you and everyone is struggling sort of just how we're going to make WTO reform meaningful in the current circumstance, and you're looking at the next ministerial, and that doesn't take away the need, I think, politically, for those of us who believe in this, to articulate it and incubate it and work it in other spaces, right? So the custodians now maybe need to be somewhere else, as we articulate this, because I think that we need it so that we know that what we do in different spaces, be it plastics or fish or somewhere else, that it fits, and responds to a broader objective, that drives this work, right? I think that's essential. That's at least essential for us as WWF. And in thinking about that too, also this point about managing different time frames, so the long term and the immediacy that we have, right? And allowing ourselves, the strategic horizon that we often employ in security policy, right? Where it's perfectly okay to have a planning horizon of 20 to 25 years, etc. Why can't we also? And in fact, for us as a conservation organization, it's the natural thing to do. That's usually the time frame that we have, for a lot of our work in the context where we operate programmatically in country. And otherwise, I can't but agree. I think it's a wealth of, thinking, thoughts, comments, that will enrich, I think, this work, right? As we shape the narrative, etc. I can just say that for us, it's clear at this point, for instance, that we need to complement the tipping points with a prefix of positive tipping points, right? So that's going to be essential for us, I think, in the years to come, that we also show a pathway forward, right? So while we also sound the alarm bell, it's also an invitation. We also need something to invite people to now understand what they can do right, in a positive way. That's something that we think a lot about at WWF. But I think, but across also, I noticed that many UN agencies are also similarly moving more into that space. Just to mention one example, yeah. Those are a couple of reflections from me. I think it's, we're going to remain invested in this and are looking forward to more opportunities in driving this.
Thank you
Carolyn,
very much.
what's yours?
No, my closing remark was just to thank you all for taking the time to be here. Thank you, all of you, for the comments on the paper and having taken the time to read it. After today, I just want to revise the paper. Our senior editor at TESS will just be appalled when I say, can we just take it off and I can fix it a bit and change it. But that's always life when writing. The most important thing is to be spurring this conversation, and continuing to try and build momentum on a way forward on these issues. I think that's what our work at TESS is all about. We're really grateful to have great allies and partners and people to challenge us and work with. And I think the key is that we continue to have conversations like this, and build that energy going forward. I'm still hopeful that the multilateral setting as part of the ecosystem of international trade cooperation is an important place for driving these conversations forward. It's not the only place, it's certainly not the only answer, but it's a part of that setting. And I think we need to build on the work underway here in this house. And so it's great to have all of you here at the public forum trying to keep that spirit alive here as well. So, and thank you. The main thing, I also thank you, WWF, for the opportunity to work with you. It's been really interesting. I've learned a lot in the process just of working with you and Luca and others on your team to think about ways forward on the topic. So I look forward to keeping WWF in here in this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks.